Captain Lee Dong-woo stood on the bridge of his ship watching the stars pass by through the main window. The ship was called Harmony Voice, and it looked exactly like what everyone in the galaxy expected from humans. It had white walls with pictures of flowers and children painted on the sides. The weapons were small and looked more like tools for fixing things than fighting. His crew was busy preparing for another peace mission. The reptile people called Vorthans were fighting the bug people called Kresh. Again, both sides had called for human help like they always did when things got bad. Humans were known across the galaxy as the species that could make anyone stop fighting. Dr. Kim So-ra was checking her medical supplies in the ship's hospital. She had been doing this job for 15 years and had seen more wars than she could count. The doctor always carried extra bandages and medicine because aliens seemed to get hurt a lot during their peace talks. She had gentle hands and a soft voice that made even the angriest warriors calm down. In the engine room, Park Min-ho was making sure everything worked perfectly. He had boxes of chocolate and small gifts ready for both sides. Fighting aliens always seemed happier when humans brought them treats. The engineer had learned that food could stop arguments faster than any weapon. His tools were clean and shiny, and he kept spare parts for alien ships because they always seemed to break things when they were angry. Communications Officer Choi Yu-jin was programming the translation computers. Both the Vorthans and Kresh spoke in ways that hurt human ears, but the computers could make their words sound normal. She had studied alien languages for years and knew exactly which words made them feel better about themselves. The young officer always wore her uniform perfectly and smiled at everyone she met. The ship arrived at Neutral Station Omega 3 days later. The station was built in empty space between Vorthan and Kresh territories so both sides could meet without feeling like the other had an advantage. It was a big metal structure that looked like a wheel turning slowly in the darkness. Hundreds of alien ships were docked there from dozens of different species. Lee Dong-woo walked through the station's corridors with his team. They passed aliens of every shape and size. Some looked like giant spiders, others looked like walking trees, and some looked like rocks with eyes. Everyone stopped to stare at the humans. Most aliens thought humans were cute in the same way humans thought puppies were cute. The peace conference was being held in the station's biggest room. The Vorthan delegation sat on one side of a long table. They were tall reptile creatures with green scales and yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. Their leader, Admiral Vex, wore military armor covered in medals and scars. His claws tapped on the table, making sharp clicking sounds. On the other side sat the Kresh delegation. They looked like giant insects with 4 arms and wings that buzzed when they were angry. Their leader, Commander Zith, had compound eyes that saw in all directions at once. Her mandibles clicked and clacked when she spoke, making sounds like breaking sticks. Her warriors stood behind her holding weapons that looked like they were grown instead of built. Between them sat Captain Lee Dong-woo and his team, looking small and harmless compared to the alien warriors. The human captain wore a simple blue uniform with no weapons visible. Dr. Kim So-ra had her medical bag and was already treating small cuts on both delegations. Engineer Park Min-ho was handing out chocolate while Communications Officer Choi Yu-jin was adjusting the translation equipment. Admiral Vex spoke first, his voice deep and harsh like grinding rocks. He showed holographic images of Kresh ships attacking Vorthan colonies. The pictures showed buildings on fire and Vorthan families running in fear. His claws scraped the table as he pointed at each image. The Kresh built settlements too close to our sacred worlds, he said through the translator. They ignore treaties that are thousands of years old. They breed like parasites and consume everything in their path. We have been patient, but patience has limits. Commander Zith responded with buzzing sounds that the translator made into angry words. She showed her own images of Vorthan soldiers burning Kresh egg nurseries. The pictures were terrible, showing young Kresh who would never get to grow up. Her compound eyes focused on the human captain as she spoke. The scaled ones claimed territory that was never theirs, she said through clicking mandibles. They destroy our children before they can hatch. They poison our worlds and call it military necessity. We defended ourselves only after they struck first. Captain Lee Dong-woo listened to both sides with the same gentle expression he always wore. He nodded at the right times and made soft sounds of understanding. His team took notes and asked careful questions. Dr. Kim So-ra offered to treat emotional trauma, while Engineer Park Min-ho suggested building shared research stations. Communications Officer Choi Yu-jin worked to make sure both sides understood each other perfectly. For 3 days, the talks continued. Both sides presented evidence of attacks and counterattacks. Each delegation claimed the other side had started the fighting. Each group said they only wanted peace, but needed justice first. The humans listened and suggested compromises like they always did. Captain Lee Dong-woo proposed shared colonies where both species could live together. He suggested trade agreements that would make both sides rich. He talked about cultural exchange programs where young Vorthans and Kresh could learn about each other. His team supported every idea with smiles and encouragement, but something was different this time. Dr. Kim So-ra watched the images of burning nurseries and her smile seemed harder to maintain. Engineer Park Min-ho saw pictures of destroyed colonies and his hands briefly closed into fists. Communications Officer Choi Yu-jin heard stories of civilians being hunted for sport, and her voice became slightly colder when she spoke. The breaking point came on the fourth day. Admiral Vex stood up and announced that diplomatic solutions had failed. The Vorthan Empire would begin cleansing operations against all Kresh worlds within their claimed territory. He used the word cleansing, but everyone knew what he really meant. Commander Zith responded by declaring that the Kresh Collective would purify the galaxy of Vorthan contamination. Her warriors buzzed with excitement at the thought of total war. She talked about releasing biological weapons that would make Vorthan worlds uninhabitable for centuries. Captain Li Dongwu maintained his diplomatic expression, but something flickered behind his eyes for just a moment. Dr. Kim So-ra continued smiling, but her knuckles were white as she gripped her medical bag. Engineer Park Min-ho kept offering chocolate, but his jaw was clenched tight. Communications Officer Choi Yu-jin translated everything perfectly, but her voice carried a new tone that made both alien leaders pause. The peace talks collapsed within hours. Both sides packed their weapons and prepared to leave the station. Admiral Vex promised that no Kresh would be left alive in Vorthan space. Commander Zith swore that Vorthan eggs would make good fertilizer for Kresh gardens. The threats grew worse with each exchange. As the Harmony voice departed from neutral station Omega, Captain Li Dongwu walked to his private quarters. He activated a communication system that had never been used during peacetime. The message was sent on frequencies that only human ships could receive. It was coded in an ancient human language that no alien species had bothered to learn. The message was 3 words in Korean that echoed across human space to every ship and colony and military base. 3 words that would change everything. 3 words that meant the galaxy was about to learn what humans really were when they stopped pretending to be harmless. Never again. Admiral Kong Hai-jin stood in the command center of her flagship, watching the war reports come in through the communication arrays. The ship was called Gentle Mercy and looked like every other human vessel, with its white hull and red medical crosses painted on the sides. Her fleet of 30 ships floated at the edge of the war zone, officially there to provide humanitarian aid and rescue civilians. The war between the Vorthans and Kresh had spread faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks, 4 star systems were burning with the light of destroyed planets. Both sides had stopped pretending to fight military targets and were now competing to see who could kill more civilians faster. The galaxy watched in horror but did nothing except send strongly worded letters. Daryun Taeyong ran the medical facilities on 3 different human worlds that had been converted into refugee camps. He treated Vorthan soldiers who had lost limbs to Kresh acid weapons and Kresh warriors who had been burned by Vorthan plasma fire. The alien patients never seemed to notice that the gentle human doctor sometimes paused while looking at their wounds, and his hands would shake with something that was not medical concern. On the planet Haven colony, the refugee camps stretched 4 kilometers in every direction. Vorthan families who had lost everything huddled in temporary shelters next to Kresh survivors whose entire hives had been poisoned. Both species had stopped hating each other long enough to focus on staying alive. The human aid workers moved among them with food and medicine and soft words of comfort. Commander Han Ji-woo supervised the distribution of supplies but spent most of her time studying tactical reports in secure underground bunkers. The official story was that humans needed to understand both sides' military capabilities to better predict refugee movements. The real reason was something that no alien had ever suspected about their peaceful friends. Late at night, when the refugees were sleeping and the aid workers had gone home, different conversations were happening in those bunkers. Human officers gathered around holographic displays showing real-time battle footage. Their faces showed expressions that their alien friends had never seen. The gentle smiles were gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. Lieutenant Song Da-yoon reported the latest casualty figures to her commanding officers. Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed that a strain of watching genocide unfold in real time. The Vorthans had just finished glassing the Kresh colony world's peaceful garden, killing 3 billion civilians in 6 hours. The Kresh had responded by releasing a biological weapon on the Vorthan agricultural world, green meadows poisoning the soil for the next 2 centuries. The numbers kept getting worse every day. Military targets were being ignored completely in favor of maximum civilian casualties. Both sides seemed to be competing to see who could commit the most horrific atrocities. Vorthan commanders bragged about creative ways to kill Kresh children, while Kresh leaders posted videos of Vorthan elders being dissolved in acid baths around the galaxy. Other species watched the carnage with growing horror but maintained their policy of non-interference. The bird-like Altarians said it was tragic but not their concern. The crystalline Zephyrites claimed that intervention would violate galactic law. The gaseous nebula simply disappeared into deep space rather than get involved. Only the humans seemed to care about the suffering. The galaxy praised their humanitarian efforts and their willingness to help both sides. Equally, human medical ships arrived at disaster sites within hours. Human aid workers risked their lives to evacuate civilians. Human diplomats begged both sides to show mercy for innocent lives, but in the secure bunkers beneath the refugee camps, human military officers were having very different discussions. Commander Han Ji-woo pulled up tactical analyses that showed exactly how both sides were conducting their genocidal campaigns. The Vorthans were using orbital bombardment to turn entire continents into glass, while the Kresh were engineering diseases that would kill slowly and painfully. Major Lee Sung-ho studied the fleet movements and troop deployments with the eye of someone who understood military strategy far better than any alien suspected. His reports detailed the strengths and weaknesses of both sides with precision that would have surprised the species who thought humans were too emotional for serious warfare. The Vorthons had superior firepower but predictable tactics, while the Kresh had better mobility but poor coordination. Breaking point came when both sides simultaneously attacked civilian evacuation convoys that were clearly marked with human medical symbols. Vorthon fighters strafed refugee ships carrying Kresh families, while Kresh bombers destroyed medical facilities. Treating Vorthon wounded, both attacks happened within hours of each other as if they had been coordinated. Dr. Yoon Tae-young was treating patients when the bombs fell on his hospital. The explosion killed 62 Vorthon patients and 31 Kresh wounded, along with 18 human medical staff. The doctor survived but spent the next 3 hours pulling bodies from the rubble. His gentle bedside manner disappeared entirely as he worked in grim silence. When Admiral Kong Hai-jin received the reports of attacks on human medical facilities, something changed in her expression. The mask of gentle concern slipped for just a moment, revealing something underneath that would have terrified any alien who saw it. Her staff officers watched as their commander made a decision that would alter the course of galactic history. The admiral activated the same secure communication system that Captain Lee Dong-woo had used weeks earlier. Her message was longer than his, but equally encoded in languages that aliens had never bothered to learn. She sent detailed battle reports, casualty figures, and tactical assessments. But the most important part was buried in military jargon that sounded routine to outside observers. Request permission to implement Protocol 7. She transmitted to Earth. The message included video footage of burning hospitals and mass graves full of children. Both Vorthon and Kresh forces had crossed lines that civilized species were not supposed to cross. They had attacked medical facilities and targeted civilian evacuation routes. They had made war against humanity itself. The response came back within 6 hours, signed by the highest levels of human government. Permission granted. The message read: show them what humans really are when we stop pretending to be civilized. The authorization codes that followed unlocked systems that had been dormant for 2 centuries. Admiral Kong called her senior staff to a meeting in the deepest bunker on the command ship. The officers who attended included some who had been pretending to be doctors and engineers and communications specialists for decades. Their real specialties were things that the galaxy had never suspected humans possessed. Colonel Park Hyun-soo was officially listed as a medical supply coordinator, but his real job was analyzing alien military technology and finding ways to defeat it. Captain Kim Jae-min was supposed to be managing refugee camps, but actually spent her time identifying strategic targets in both Vorthon and Kresh space. The meeting lasted for hours, and when it ended, every human ship in the war zone began subtle changes. Medical vessels started carrying different types of scanning equipment. Transport ships began moving with more precision and purpose. The small escort frigates that protected the convoys started running combat drills when they thought no one was watching. But the most significant change was in the humans themselves. The gentle smiles that would define their species for 2 centuries became harder to maintain when Vorthon officials bragged about their latest massacre. Human diplomats' responses carried a subtle edge that made the reptilian warriors uncomfortable. When Kresh commanders described their biological weapons, human medical staff asked very specific technical questions. The galaxy was about to discover that their favorite peaceful species had been playing a role for 200 years. They were about to learn that human kindness came with conditions and that human mercy had limits. They were about to find out what happened when you made the mistake of making war against the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. The mask was beginning to slip, and underneath was something that would reshape the balance of power across the stars. Captain Lim Soo-jin stood on the bridge of her ship, watching the Vorthon bombardment fleet prepare to destroy another world. The vessel was called Peaceful Dawn and had spent the last month evacuating refugees from war zones like all human ships. It looked harmless, with white hull plating and medical symbols painted in bright red colors. But today, something was different about the way it moved through space. The crush world of Harmony Falls hung below them like a blue and green jewel. 3 billion insect people lived on its surface in cities that looked like giant honeycombs. They had no way to escape because the Vorthon fleet had destroyed all their ships in the first wave of attacks. Now 50 Vorthon battleships floated in orbit, preparing to turn the entire planet into molten glass. Admiral Vex commanded the Vorthon fleet from his flagship Scaled Justice. He was the same reptilian officer who had walked out of the peace talks weeks earlier. Now he wore battle armor stained with the blood of a dozen worlds. His claws were longer and sharper from all the killing he had personally done. His yellow eyes glowed with the satisfaction of someone who enjoyed his work. The human captain requested permission to speak with the Vorthon admiral over the communication system. Her voice carried the same gentle tone that aliens had grown accustomed to hearing from her species. She explained that her small fleet of medical ships wanted to evacuate as many civilians as possible before the bombardment began. Admiral Vex laughed at the request, making sounds like rocks grinding together. He counted 12 human vessels against his 50 battleships. Even if the humans worked constantly for months, they could never save more than a tiny fraction of the population. The idea that these soft creatures thought they could make a difference amused him greatly. Little human, he said through the translator. You have perhaps a dozen small medical ships. We count 3 billion insects down there. Even if you worked for a year, you could not save even 1% of them. Why do you waste our time with this foolishness, Captain? Lim smiled, the same gentle expression that humans had been showing the galaxy for 2 centuries. Her crew worked quietly at their stations, preparing systems that no alien had ever seen in operation. The ship around them began to change in ways that should have been impossible, according to everything the galaxy knew about human technology. We appreciate your concern, Admiral, she replied in her soft voice. We will do our best to help as many as we can. Please give us 30 minutes to begin evacuation procedures. Then you can proceed with your military operations. What happened next would be remembered by every species in the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. The human medical ship Peaceful Dawn started to transform before the amazed eyes of the Vorthan fleet. Panels slid away to reveal weapon systems that were far more advanced than anything the reptilian empire had ever built. The hull began to reconfigure itself as hidden sections extended outward. The ship grew larger and more angular, losing its gentle curves and taking on the appearance of something designed for war. Armor plating emerged from concealed compartments, providing protection that could withstand planetary bombardment, but the physical transformation was nothing compared to the change in Captain Lim herself. The gentle smile disappeared from her face, replaced by an expression of absolute determination that made Admiral Vex step backward in instinctive fear. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded real warships in real battles. Admiral, she said with deadly calm, you have 30 minutes to withdraw your fleet from this system. If you fire a single shot at the planet's surface, we will consider it an act of war against humanity. I suggest you use this time to contact your superiors and explain the situation. Vorthan Admiral stared at the transformed human ship, trying to understand what he was seeing. The vessel that had looked like a harmless medical transport now bristled with weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Energy readings showed power levels that exceeded his entire fleet's combined output. You threaten us with converted medical ships, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Even if they have hidden weapons, we outnumber you 50-1. No single species has ever challenged the might of the Vorthan Empire. Captain Lim's smile returned, but it was nothing like the gentle expression aliens had grown accustomed to. This smile belonged to a predator who had been pretending to be prey for far too long. Her eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had studied every possible way to kill the creatures standing before her. Admiral, she said softly, you seem to be under the impression that these are all the ships we have. The space around the Vorthan fleet began to shimmer as cloaking fields deactivated. 200 human vessels materialized in perfect formation, surrounding the reptilian battleships. Each ship was larger and more heavily armed than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their hulls were black as space itself and covered in weapon systems that defied conventional understanding. The Vorthan crews panicked as their sensors registered energy signatures that should not have been possible. Human ships that had been disguised as medical transports and refugee vessels revealed themselves as the most advanced warships ever built. Every gentle aid worker and soft-spoken diplomat had been a soldier in disguise. Admiral Vex tried to maintain his composure, but his claws were shaking as he gripped his command chair. The scaled warrior who had laughed at human weakness now faced a fleet that could destroy his empire without breaking formation. His communications officer reported that similar human fleets were throughout Vorthan space. Admiral Kong Hai Jin appeared on the main communication screen, her face showing none of the diplomatic courtesy that had defined human interactions for 2 centuries. She wore the uniform of a fleet commander, and her expression promised violence on a scale the galaxy had never imagined. This is Admiral Kong of the Human Defense Force, she announced to every ship in both fleets. All Vorthan and Kresh military vessels have 30 minutes to withdraw from combat zones and return to your home systems. Any ship that fires on civilian targets after this warning will be destroyed. Revelation spread across the galaxy within hours as news networks broadcast footage of the confrontation. Species that had considered humans harmless pets suddenly realized they had been living next to the most dangerous predators in known space. Emergency council sessions were called as governments tried to understand what this meant for galactic politics. The Vorthan admiral made the only choice available to him. He ordered his fleet to withdraw from the system without firing a shot. The mighty scaled justice turned and fled from a species they had dismissed as weak and emotional. His crew watched in stunned silence as human ships escorted them to the edge of the system, but humanity was not finished revealing its secrets. Admiral Park Kyun-ho addressed the Galactic Council directly, and his message was broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy. Gone was the diplomatic courtesy and gentle demeanor that had defined human interaction for 2 centuries. For 200 years, he said, his voice carrying controlled fury, humanity has watched this galaxy tear itself apart in countless wars. We have mediated your conflicts, healed your wounded, and rebuilt your worlds, always hoping you would learn to be better. The assembled alien diplomats sat in terrified silence. This was not the human they knew. This was something far more dangerous than anything they had ever encountered. Their peaceful friends had revealed themselves as masters of war who had been holding back their true power for centuries. Today, that delusion ends. Admiral Park Kyung-ho stood before the assembled Galactic Council in the Great Chamber on Capital Prime. His uniform was black with silver insignia that no alien had ever seen before. The gentle blue and white colors that humans usually wore were gone, replaced by something that spoke of military authority and barely contained violence. The holographic display behind him showed the current casualty figures from the war between Vorthins and Kresh, 70 billion dead in just 6 weeks, with both sides now competing to invent new ways to torture civilians before killing them entire. Star systems had been poisoned with biological weapons that would make them uninhabitable for thousands of years. We studied your histories, Admiral Park, continued his voice echoing through the silent chamber. Every species represented here has committed what you call genocide at least once. Most of you have done it multiple times. We thought that by showing you a better way, we could guide you toward civilization. The alien delegates sat frozen in their seats, afraid to move or speak. The peaceful humans they had known were gone, replaced by something that radiated menace like heat from a star. The Admiral's eyes swept across the chamber, cataloging every species, every representative, every potential threat. The reptilian Vorthin ambassador tried to stand, but his legs would not support him. The insectoid Kresh delegate's wings buzzed with terror. The crystalline Zephyrite representative's body flickered with colors that indicated extreme fear. Even the gaseous nebulans had condensed into tight spheres of frightened mist. You see our kindness as weakness, Admiral Park said, his voice growing colder. You interpret our mercy as inability. You have convinced yourselves that humans are soft emotional creatures who pose no threat to anyone. Today that delusion ends forever. The holographic display changed to show real-time footage from the war zones. Vorthin soldiers were using on Crash nurseries while laughing at the sounds of dying larvae. Crash warriors were injecting Vorthin children with acids that would dissolve them slowly from the inside. Both sides recorded their atrocities and broadcast them as entertainment. Behind the Admiral, other human officers entered the chamber. They moved with the precision of trained killers and wore the same black uniforms that spoke of military power beyond anything the galaxy had imagined. General Kim Tae-hoon carried tactical displays showing the deployment of human forces throughout known space. Colonel Bang Min presented intelligence reports that detailed every military installation, weapon stockpile, and strategic weakness of both warring empires. The information was so complete and accurate that it could only have come from centuries of careful observation and planning. Major Shin Yoon-jung showed footage of human ships dropping their disguises across the galaxy. Medical vessels became battlecruisers. Transport ships revealed themselves as troop carriers. Even the small escort frigates transformed into destroyers capable of annihilating entire fleets. Both the Vorthin Empire and Kresh Collective have chosen to wage war against civilian populations. Admiral Park announced they have decided that genocide is an acceptable military tactic. They have demonstrated that they are incapable of civilized behavior. The alien diplomats began to understand what was coming, and the fear in the chamber became a living thing that seemed to press against the walls. Several delegates tried to activate emergency communication systems to warn their governments, but found that all signals were being blocked by human technology. The bird-like Altarian ambassador finally found the courage to speak, her voice shaking with terror. Surely you do not mean to interfere in the internal affairs of sovereign species. The Galactic Charter forbids any single power from imposing its will on others. Admiral Park turned his attention to the feathered diplomat, and his smile was colder than the space between stars. The Galactic Charter was written when you thought humans were harmless pets. That document no longer applies to us. We are rewriting the rules of galactic civilization. Holographic display showed human fleets moving into position around every major world in both empires. Thousands of ships that had been hidden for centuries were now visible as they prepared to demonstrate what total war actually looked like when conducted by masters of the art. General Kim Tae-hoon stepped forward and activated a new display showing the military analysis of both empires. The Vorthin fleet numbered over 10,000 battleships supported by millions of smaller vessels. Their ground forces included billions of soldiers equipped with the finest weapons their technology could produce. The Kresh military was even larger, with swarm tactics that could overwhelm any conventional defense. Their biological weapons were capable of sterilizing entire worlds, and their hive ships could carry populations of warriors that numbered in the trillions. But the human analysis showed weaknesses that neither empire had realized they possessed. The Vorthins relied too heavily on centralized command structures that could be disrupted. The Kresh hive mind made them vulnerable to certain types of electromagnetic interference that humans had perfected centuries ago. Therefore, Admiral Park concluded humanity will now demonstrate what total war actually looks like. We will show the galaxy what happens when a species that has spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing finally stops pretending to be peaceful. Colonel Bang Min activated the final display showing the human battle plan. It was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope. Phase 1 would eliminate all military assets of both empires simultaneously. Phase 2 would occupy every strategic location. Phase 3 would establish new governments Under human supervision, the whole operation was scheduled to take 72 hours. The gaseous nebula delegate managed to reform enough to speak. This is madness. You cannot simply destroy two galactic empires. No single species has that kind of power. The galaxy will unite against you. Admiral Park's expression never changed as he delivered his final statement to the council. You still do not understand what you are dealing with. We are not just another species competing for resources. We are apex predators who have been pretending to be herbivores for your comfort. The human officers began filing out of the chamber, leaving the alien delegates alone with their terror. Communications were restored just as the last human disappeared. The scramble to warn their governments began immediately, but it was already too late. Across the galaxy, human sleeper agents who had been posing as diplomats, doctors, engineers, and teachers for decades were simultaneously revealing their true nature and taking control of critical infrastructure. The transformation was so complete and coordinated that it seemed like magic to species who had never suspected the deception. Admiral Park's final words echoed through the chamber as the alien delegates realized they were witnessing the end of one age and the beginning of another. The galaxy would never again mistake human kindness for weakness, because the consequences of that mistake were about to be demonstrated on a scale that would be remembered. For millennia, the war was about to begin, and it would last exactly 72 hours. The war lasted exactly 72 hours and 13 minutes. That was how long it took humanity to completely dismantle two galactic empires that had been building their military might for over 1,000 years each. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as their peaceful friends demonstrated what total war looked like when waged by true masters. Commander HFY led the assault on the Vorthan home system with only 12 ships. Her battle group looked tiny against the massive orbital defense networks that protected the reptilian capital world, but appearances had been deceiving humanity for centuries, and today that deception would end forever. The Vorthan High Command watched from their underground bunkers as human vessels approached. Their impregnable fortress world Admiral Vex himself stood in the main command center, surrounded by 10,000 of his finest officers. The same reptilian warrior who had fled from Captain Lim Su-jin now prepared to make his final stand. Orbital defense platforms that ringed the Vorthan homeworld were legendary throughout the galaxy. Each station was the size of a small moon and armed with weapons that could crack continents. The energy shields protecting them had never been penetrated. In 1,000 years of warfare, Commander activated her targeting systems and spoke into her communication device with the same gentle voice that had once offered medical aid to wounded aliens. Target all military installations, avoid civilian areas, prepare for precision strikes. What happened next defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about the laws of physics. Human weapons fired beams of energy that seemed to bend space itself. The legendary orbital platforms simply ceased to exist, dissolving into their component atoms. Without producing any explosion or debris, the Vorthan fleet tried to respond, but their ships were moving through some kind of field that made their weapons useless every time they fired. Their energy beams curved away from human targets and dissipated harmlessly into space. Their missiles turned around and flew back toward their own ships. Before deactivating within 6 hours, the entire Vorthan military was neutralized. Every shipyard, weapons factory, and military base had been reduced to molecular dust. The government buildings were intact but empty as reptilian leaders found themselves transported to secure facilities where they would await trial for war crimes. Simultaneously, Captain Bei Jong-su struck at the heart of Kresh space with equal precision. The insectoid species had built their entire civilization around massive hive ships that could house billions of their kind. These vessels were destroyed so quickly that most crews never realized they were under attack. The Crushed Queen herself watched from her throne ship as human forces systematically dismantled her empire. Her compound eyes could see in all directions but could not comprehend the technology being used. Against her people, weapons that should have taken hours to charge were firing continuously without any apparent power. Source: Captain Bei transmitted a message to every surviving Kresh vessel using their own communication frequencies. Your military forces have been eliminated. Your government is dissolved. Your people will be relocated to worlds where they can rebuild without threatening others. The precision of the human assault was what truly terrified the watching galaxy. Not a single civilian died in the attacks. Hospitals, schools, and residential areas remained completely untouched, while everything related to warfare was obliterated with surgical accuracy. Yoon Tae-young coordinated the medical responses. Billions of former soldiers and government officials were processed through human detention centers. The same gentle doctor who had treated alien refugees now oversaw the systematic dismantling of two galactic empires. His medical expertise ensured that even the war criminals received proper care. The galaxy finally understood what they had been living next to for 2 centuries. Humans were not peaceful because they were weak. They were peaceful because they were so overwhelmingly powerful that conventional warfare held no interest for them. They had been playing a role while possessing the capability to conquer everything. Major Shin Yoon-jung supervised the establishment of new governments on former Vorthan and Kresh worlds. The transition was so smooth that most Civilians never experienced any disruption to their daily lives. Human administrators, who had been disguised as aid workers for decades, now revealed their true expertise. The relocated populations found themselves on carefully chosen worlds that could support their biological needs. Former Warthan soldiers were given jobs in construction and agriculture, while ex-Kresh warriors became environmental engineers. The occupation was so benevolent that many aliens began to wonder if they were being punished or rewarded. Admiral Park Kyung-ho addressed the galaxy one final time from the bridge of his flagship. The vessel had shed its disguise and now appeared as what it truly was, a warship so advanced that it seemed to be made of solidified starlight itself. The Vorthan Empire and Kresh Collective no longer exist as military powers, he announced to every inhabited world. Their populations will be relocated to worlds where they can rebuild their civilizations under human supervision. Any species that chooses to wage war against civilian populations will receive the same treatment. The Admiral paused and looked directly into the camera that would carry his image to billions of alien viewers across the galaxy. His next words would be remembered by every species for generations to come. We showed you mercy because we hoped you could learn to be better. We hid our true nature because we believed you deserved the chance to evolve beyond your violent instincts. That experiment is now over. The implications of his statements sent shockwaves through galactic civilization. Every species began emergency reviews of their military policies and diplomatic relationships with humanity. The bird-like Altarians immediately disbanded. Their army, the Crystalline Zephyrites, announced they were converting all weapons factories to manufacturing medical equipment. Wars between species did not end entirely, but they became civilized affairs, fought between military forces with strict rules of engagement. Nobody wanted to risk awakening the sleeping giants who had spent 2 centuries pretending to be harmless diplomats. Captain Lim Soo-jin returned to her role as a medical officer, but her ship no longer bothered to disguise its true capabilities. The Peaceful Dawn now served as a mobile hospital that could reach any disaster site in the galaxy within hours. Her crew provided the same gentle care they had always offered, but everyone now understood the steel beneath their smiles. Humanity settled back into their role as mediators and peacekeepers, but the galaxy would never again mistake their kindness for weakness. They were still willing to help, still eager to heal and build and teach, but now everyone knew that human patience had limits and human mercy came with conditions. The phrase, "never again," became humanity's unofficial motto, plastered on every human ship and facility throughout the galaxy. It served as both a promise and a warning, a promise that humans would never again allow genocide to occur while they had the power to prevent it, and a warning that anyone who tested that resolve would face consequences beyond their ability to comprehend. The galaxy had entered a new age of peace, enforced not by law or treaty, but by the certain knowledge that the most dangerous predators in known space were watching and would not tolerate another descent into barbarism. Never again.